Good evening. Welcome to Deep Dive with Dr. Tracy. I am your host, Dr. Tracy Pearson, and I have to say I am so happy to be back with you, though I'm a little rusty because for the past however many weeks we've been off air, I have been riding, in essence, sort of shotgun to anchors on the Law and Crime Network, where I am Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so I'm a little rusty, and so I hope you'll forgive me for that. I am super, super excited to have you with me, though. If you have never seen our show, welcome. And if you have seen our show, welcome back. We're really glad to have you back. Tonight, we are going to dig deeper into the case of Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. And we're going to do that in an incredibly special way. Tonight, I have phenomenal guests, and I mean phenomenal guests that are here with us. They are people that I know, that I have worked with on Law and Crime, and they have incredible minds and incredible analysis. So I'm really excited. But before we get to that, I want to sort of catch you up on this case. If by chance you happen to have missed something about it, I want you to have an opportunity to catch up at least on the basics so that you can follow our conversation about it. But if you've been on Twitter, even if you've been on Instagram or Facebook, I can tell you that this thing is everywhere. And I mean everywhere. It doesn't matter really what the tweet is you're reading. There's somebody who is putting either hashtag justice for Johnny or hashtag Amber Heard, something along those lines. So you probably know what I'm talking about, but let me catch up.
Johnny Depp, at one point the most well-known film actor in the world. Amber Heard, now the subject of memes and TikToks. A lesser-known actor who has appeared in Aquaman and was a L'Oreal spokesperson. The couple met on the set of the film The Rum Diary. In 2012, their romantic relationship was official. They became engaged in 2014, and they were married on February 3rd, 2015. Now, Depp and Heard are facing off in a state court in Fairfax County, Virginia. According to court filings, only 1 month into their marriage, Heard was allegedly having an affair with Elon Musk. 15 months into their marriage, Depp ended the relationship and planned to file for divorce. According to Depp's complaint, after being lured to his penthouse to pick up his personal property, Heard, in front of friends, falsely began yelling, "Stop hitting me, Johnny." While she would later present these now former friends as witnesses, Depp has his witnesses too. Depp's security team were waiting mere feet away. LAPD responded to a telephone call placed by one of Heard's friends and another who was located in New York at the time and not present at the property. Responding officers trained in domestic violence calls observed no injury and no property damage. 6 days later, while Depp was out of town, Heard filed for an ex parte domestic violence restraining order after walking in front of paparazzi who snapped pictures of a reportedly bruised Heard. She later appeared on the cover of People magazine, designed for effect. Heard settled with Depp for $7 million, which she first pledged, then later claimed to have donated to 2 charities, the ACLU and the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. On settlement, Heard withdrew her claims and petition of domestic violence. The couple issued a joint statement. The divorce was finalized on January 13, 2017. In an effort to rehabilitate her image, Heard, in exchange for a promise to pay $3.5 million to the ACLU, became an ambassador for the ACLU, a charity with which she had no prior involvement. With the ACLU's help, Heard published an op-ed in the Washington Post in December of 2018. She republished it when she tweeted a link to the op-ed. To date, Heard has not paid the $3.5 million. On March 1st, 2019, less than a year later, Depp filed a lawsuit in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The case is located in Fairfax County, Virginia, because that is where the servers are located that host the Washington Post. Defamation per se occurs when a false statement involving an offense of moral turpitude, such as domestic violence and sexual assault, is published, and as a result, reputational damage is presumed. By contrast, defamation requires a false published statement and proof that the statement led to reputational damage. In Virginia, the legal burden of proof is by clear and convincing evidence because Depp and Heard are both public figures. Unsuccessful in securing removal or dismissal, Heard brought her own claim of defamation against Depp for the purported behavior of Alan Waldman, Depp's former lawyer who represented him in this case. Depp is suing for $50 million. Heard countersued for $100 million. The trial began April 11, 2022. Numerous exhibits were introduced. Among them were recorded conversations of both, the knife that Heard gave to Depp, her alleged abuser, as a gift, photographs, medical records that did not reflect Heard was ever injured. This case is different from the UK case where Depp sued the Sun for publishing that he was a wife beater. In addition to the case being against a publication and in a different country with different laws, that case was decided by a single judge, and much of the evidence admitted in the Virginia case was disallowed, undiscovered, or rejected by the UK judge. In addition to the case being against a publication and in a different country with different laws. By contrast, 11 jurors were seated in Virginia, 7 of whom will decide the case with 4 alternates. Social media has played a significant role in the fury around this lawsuit, with hashtags such as Justice for Johnny and Amber Heard is a psychopath among them. Courtroom access is by bracelet only. Each day, crowds of people supporting Depp grow larger, with fans hoping to catch a glimpse of the film actor. Tonight, with the help of my guests, forensic psychologist Dr. John Delatorre, attorney Rich Schoenstein, attorney and investigator Felicia Nance, and jury trial consultant Dr. Jill Huntley Taylor, we dig deeper into a case that has taken over the Twitter sphere.
Here we are. I promised you a round table. Well, you get a rectangle. And to start us off, I'm going to ask my guests to introduce themselves tonight, because usually we are introduced, and I thought it would be nice for them to tell you a little bit about themselves. Karen?
Hi, my name is Karen Nance. Good evening. I'm an attorney in the San Francisco Bay Area in California, and I am a criminal defense attorney. I do private investigator work and conflict resolution. Thanks for having me, Dr. Tracy.
I think John is next.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Dr. John Delatorre. I'm a licensed psychologist in Arizona, New York State, and Texas. I have a private practice, and I primarily practice in forensic psychology.
Rich, I think you're next.
All right, I'm Rich Schoenstein. I'm a litigator and trial lawyer at the firm Tarter, Krinsky, and Drogan in New York City. I host a podcast called Law Brief, and I've been appearing on the Law and Crime Network as an analyst.
And Dr. Jill.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jill Huntley Taylor, and I usually don't use the doctor, but I am a Ph.D. in social psychology, but I practice as a trial consultant, and I have for the past almost 25 years, and I have my own trial consulting firm, Taylor Trial Consulting, and I work primarily on civil litigation.
Thank you all for agreeing to be here this evening. I have never hosted a round table on the show, and I thought that this case was an excellent opportunity to do that, because typically when we're on TV, we're given about 45 seconds to barf out our position on something that we've seen in response to a question. I don't know about you folks, but I typically just answer the question I want to answer and find a way of segueing to that. Anybody who's watched me knows that. But that'll get me in trouble next Tuesday, I'm sure. But I know that tonight what I want to do is focus on the things that you guys have been just churning about. So to start us off, I want to talk a little bit about these experts. These experts that were presented, each side presented a psychological expert. Both were forensic psychologists. One was Dr. Shannon Curry, and she was somebody who was a witness for Johnny Depp. And the other was Dr. Hughes, who was a witness for Amber Heard. Dr. John, you want to take point on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a unique experience, being on Law and Crime and Court TV, where I get to see all of these experts and then kind of dissect what would I have done if I was given this psycholegal question that I believe all of these experts attempted to answer. When it comes down to it, I don't think either one really did that great of a job when it comes to actually answering the psycholegal question. Essentially, what they should have been, what kind of evaluation they should have been conducting, it's more of a personal injury, right? Did something happen that was traumatic, and then did they suffer some kind of emotional distress solely because of that traumatic event? That's a personal injury psychological evaluation. Dr. Curry, she was in a unique position because this was the first time that she had ever done a civil case. She had done plenty of criminal cases, and my understanding is that she has an extensive history of criminal work. And it shows when she gave her testimony, right? She appeared so credible, right? everything that she said was so smooth, so easygoing, everything in bite-sized morsels that absolutely fit the narrative that was already inside the jury's minds. Dr. Don Hughes, on the other hand, is someone who has extensive experience conducting post-traumatic stress disorder research, right, doing evaluations on domestic violence and intimate partner violence. She's the person who has a tremendous history conducting these kinds of evaluations, and she is absolutely the one that you want doing this evaluation. And I think both of the evaluations were absolutely terrible. They were fundamentally flawed when it comes to the science. I don't know how they came up with why they did what they did. Unfortunately, I think Dr. Dawn Hughes, she was at times too aggressive, too combative. And I think that a lot of halo bias was placed around Dr. Shannon Curry that I think, people chose to listen to Shannon Curry's evaluation, despite it also being fundamentally flawed, rather than Dr. Dawn Hughes's, because Dr. Hughes just didn't come across as all that credible.
How did we end up there then? How did they end up conducting the evaluations they ended up conducting?
Well, it's unclear. I'm pretty sure if you Google, forensic psychologists in the Los Angeles area, I'm pretty sure Dr. Curry's name's going to get around. Particularly, that's how we network, right? That's how us forensic psychologists, that's how we get business, is we network with other attorneys and our reports are in the court. And so as these attorneys get to know our work, then they come searching us out. Dr. Dawn Hughes has been around for decades doing this kind of evaluation. So if you look up post-traumatic stress disorder and domestic violence, it's her name that's going to come up. So that's the person that you absolutely want. And when it comes to Dr. Curry, it's probably just because, her name's out there in the criminal world and they needed someone to conduct this evaluation.
What does everybody else think? Dr. Jill?
Can I jump in? Yeah. It's so interesting to hear that perspective, because I think from the jury standpoint, I think when it comes to experts from a jury standpoint, there's a baseline, right? The experts have to meet that baseline. And then beyond that, it's who do they find more credible? Who do they like more? Who do they trust more? And I think clearly Dr. Curry has the upper hand when it comes to those criteria. Even if she doesn't have the better credentials, she has the better presence with the jury. So that's a huge plus in Johnny Depp's camp. And I think everybody really observed that despite their difference in qualifications.
I totally agree with that. I mean, Dr. Curry came in, she's been the best witness in the case, right? She was totally engaged with the jury. She charmed the Bojangles out of them and everybody who was watching. She did a great job. And even though she is less experienced than the other expert, there's two sides to that. On the one hand, Dr. Hughes is more experienced. She's board certified, whatever that means. On the other hand, it makes her look like a gun for hire, just an expert who was brought in because someone paid her fee. And even though Dr. Curry is the same, right? They both got paid to testify. She didn't come off that way.
Karen, any thoughts?
Well, I agree with Dr. Jill and Dr. Richard. Sorry, Dr. John. I think that for the jury and me as an outsider who's not familiar with the technical aspect of your science, the forensic science, they're going to look at the presentation of the witnesses. And I agree that Dr. Curry came off as more credible, much easier to understand. She's put the information in a simplified form. At times, Dr. Hughes appeared a bit disorganized. Let me look at my notes. I don't remember that. And I think that Dr. Curry came across as more likable and much more understandable and convincing to the jury. I don't think that they care whether the diagnosis is borderline personality disorder or PTSD. I think that they are swayed by the presentation of the witnesses. And I think Dr. Curry beat Dr. Hughes in that respect.
Now, Dr. Jill, go ahead, John. Jump right in.
If I can jump in, because I think Karen hit on something that I absolutely wanted to make mention. And that is what I've seen in the social media of the weaponizing of the diagnoses that Dr. Curry gave for Amber Heard, which I think were 100% inappropriate. I'm not convinced that Amber Heard has either one of these diagnoses, much less both severe personality disorders at the same time. Can it happen? Yes, diagnostically it can happen. But I mean, just one evaluation, and all we know about Amber Heard and her instability with relationships really only comes from the relationship that she had with Johnny Depp. It's not a pervasive pattern of instability in her relationships if it only happens with one person. Now, yes, there's Kate James, and there's all these other people, but I mean, it's Hollywood, it's drama, right? And it's individuals who probably have an axe to grind, who are elaborating more than what is actually there. But on social media, weaponizing these things to turn against Amber Heard, and in some ways, it turns against anybody else who may, in fact, have these diagnoses, because they're gonna feel ostracized. That if they're diagnosed with these things, people are just going to shun them. And I think that part of what Dr. Curry did was wrong, because I'm not convinced that it's there.
Jill, do you agree? Do you agree that the diagnoses were off, inappropriate, weaponized, any of that?
Well, I don't know. And ultimately, from my standpoint, and you'll hear me say this all the time, the only people that really matter are the jurors. They're the ones that get to decide this case. They hold all the power. And so whatever this swirl of media is going on, and whatever people are talking about in the world is important, but it's not important in terms of how this case comes out. So I think I can agree that, from a standpoint of people having serious mental illness and these diagnoses, it's not a favorable thing for that to get kind of dragged through the mud. But from the jury standpoint, I think they latch on to this, and they're focused on this case and this particular person. And to the extent that diagnosis means that someone is engaging in misconduct, that's important to know. And that's important to evaluate. And that's what they're there to evaluate. And I think it's interesting because, describing it as an assessment of like a personal injury, I kind of saw it different. I kind of saw a little differently. I took it as sort of the truth of the matter, and was she abused, and or is there some other situation going on? Like, I think that I don't know that jurors are listening to it in the same way, and maybe not even in the appropriate way. But and maybe that's just me, but I think that they're listening to it as to the truth of the matter of whether these claims are true.
And I'll jump in a little bit on why a psychologist can't answer that question that Dr. Jill just posed.
Yeah.
If there's anybody that you would think should be able to answer as to whether or not someone committed a specific behavior, you would think that a psychologist would do that. Ethically, though, we're not investigators, right? We're not law enforcement. We're presented with a certain psycholegal question, right? Based on case law, based on statutes, that exist. We can only answer certain kinds of questions. There's only so far that we're going to be able to go, right? That ultimately the trier of fact is the jury, that we can only render an opinion. The issue becomes, are you using a confirmation bias, right? Are you using assessments that are specifically designed to confirm the theory that you already had? In this case, that Amber Heard suffered from domestic violence and has PTSD, which is what Dawn Hughes did, right? She gave assessments that specifically looked at domestic violence, intimate partner violence, that was on it, that's only face valid. Like a question of, did your partner slap you in the face or something like that, right? That's the kind of evaluation that Dr. Hughes did. And we can't answer whether or not someone was actually abused. That's not our role. It goes to a question that we should have been having as a consequence of this case, which is, how do people perceive abuse? What are the different cultural behaviors that are associated with abuse? And unfortunately, we were not able to have some of these more nuanced questions when it comes to domestic violence, intimate partner violence, gendered stereotypes as a result of violence, and the perception of abuse, because of the theatrics of everything else.
And can I piggyback on that for a minute to talk about litigation strategy, something near and dear to my heart? I mean, this is really where Depp's team took control of this trial. I don't know what the procedural machination was that permitted them to do a psychological evaluation of her without him getting a psychological evaluation. But
I know the answer to that.
Okay, well, I'd be fascinated. But just the fact that it happened, right? Just the fact that only one of them, their psychological evaluation is even being discussed in the trial, that's already a win for the Depp team. Only one of them is at issue. And then the way they presented Dr. Curry and where they presented Dr. Curry in their case to answer the jury's question, which must have been burning at that moment, what's this woman's problem? And they put Dr. Curry on to give it a name. I take your point, Dr. John, that maybe she got it wrong. But for the jury, she gave a name to the problem. She described the problem. She predicted what Amber Heard would do on the witness stand. And in the trial, they set it up masterfully with that.
The way we got there, my understanding is that they filed a motion for an independent medical exam because Amber Heard, when she filed her counterclaim, she put emotional injury at issue. And so Johnny Depp didn't. He stuck with economic damages. And that's how they got the IME. And in fact, Amber Heard's team filed a motion for an IME on Johnny Depp, and it was denied.
And there are so many little procedural moves like that in a litigation like this that happened years before the trial, and they matter. And that one mattered a lot. It
did. And yet I can't help but sit back here and think, but she did predict what she was going to do. I mean, I watched, you know, at times cringing, almost like it was a car crash, and seeing her behave almost consistently with the way that Dr. Curry laid out she would. Now, whether that has a name or not, I don't know. I mean, whether she was accurate about the name, she certainly predicted it. Don't you agree?
I think one of us. Well, you go, John.
I mean, yes, I did. But I mean, ultimately, she had a 50-50 chance, right? That she was either going to get it right in her prediction or she was going to get it wrong. And I don't know. Psychologists are supposedly, you know, the bastion of predicting when, you know, if someone's going to do something or not. We're not any better than anybody else. I think she got lucky. But she got lucky, you know, purposefully, right? Because she did conduct an evaluation. She did present and confront evidence during the course of that evaluation. That's how I conduct my evaluations. So yeah, at that point, I predicted that that's how someone was going to be. I mean, it's a 50-50 shot if she was going to get it right or not. And she got lucky.
Now, Rich and I have talked at times. I was on Law Brief for one of his episodes, and we did a halftime show. And we've also, I think we've been on together on Law and Crime when we've been talking about this case. And I have to say that the lawyering in this case has driven me batty. I mean, I just like sitting there, just like, why can't you ask a question properly? Why can't you move it into evidence? Like, why are you struggling here? John, or rather, Rich, Karen, either of you have any feelings about that either way?
Well, I'd like to jump in. I think that we're talking about civil attorneys who are used to depositions, and there's a lot of leeway with depositions. And being in front of a court, this is really more like a criminal trial where criminal attorneys are used to objecting and having the proper objections and keeping the flow going. So I think that the civil attorneys are in a civil deposition mode, and it's a totally different animal than being in a criminal court. And this is, even though this is a civil case, it's being handled pretty much like a criminal court. And so I think that that's what we're looking at. And that's the deficits that we see. All the objections and the bases are just, it drags the case on. Everybody's on a time limit, and we know that. And so it's just a question of making sure that people stay on task. So that's my read on it.
I'm going to agree. I mean, you know, first of all, did I read that right is not a great cross-examination question. And it's a worse cross-examination question the 50th time you ask it. You can't just keep showing them documents and asking, did I read that right? And you can't just keep saying, what if anything, to try to get around hearsay. I would send several of these attorneys back to a remedial hearsay class. If you're doing the trial of your lifetime and it's going to be broadcast to the world, you need to be able to get your documents into evidence in one fell swoop. You can't be fighting and having sidebars every 3 minutes about hearsay objections. So I have found it problematic as well.
I mean, in my practice, when I was practicing law, it was typically standard for you to agree on the exhibits that were going to go in. And then there was like a small handful of exhibits that we were going to fight over. And except for one trial I did one time, because that's all I had. But this case is just really awkward in the way that they're handling evidence. And, you know, what do you think the jury is thinking about that? Dr. Jill?
It's always hard to tell, but jurors don't like all the disruption. They like drama. So to the extent that there is tension and drama, and I think some of that was created by all of the objections, because it threw Elaine, it threw her off so much. And so I think that probably the jurors probably enjoyed some of that drama, but they don't like interruption. And so like today, I think first of all, seeing these video depositions, that's also incredibly annoying to jurors. But when it's like attorney-client privilege, it just feels like a complete waste of time for the jurors. So, you know, I think that they're curious about sidebars, but they don't like the disruptions, and including objections, unless it's creating drama. So, you know, I think most civil lawyers don't do all those objections because it makes it look like they've got something that they're worried about. But that's not exactly how it looked to me.
And Dr. Jill, I have a question. When jurors see a videotape deposition, they automatically assume it's less important than a live witness, right? Don't they start with that presumption?
Yeah, I mean, you know, they're paying attention, but generally and I think that in this case, the witnesses themselves spoke to that, because you've got a witness who's like driving, you've got a witness who's smoking, you've got to the extent that, you know, there's already a lesser to the video, and then you've got this behavior that you would never see in court.
You had one guy driving and smoking.
Yeah, right.
He was in LA. I'm very curious about what he might have been smoking, but. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the witness today was vaping today too. So, you know, they're in a more relaxed situation. Some of them are kind of like, you know, even their setting, it diminishes the value of the testimony, and the jurors can get quite bored with it.
I have never done a case where I've submitted a deposition in place of a live testimony, and I have to say that that I think this may be unique for Virginia. I know they have a court rule that says if you're 100 miles outside Virginia, then you can't be compelled to be there in person. And that was part of the problem that we had, was that almost everybody was out this way in Los Angeles. So the other part of the lawyering piece for me was that deposition today that we saw, which was the attorney, Adam Waldman. He had actually entered an appearance in this case for Johnny Depp, and ultimately ended up having to withdraw his appearance because there was this counterclaim. And the basis for the counterclaim is that Amber Heard says that through him, Johnny Depp engaged in a smear campaign. Involving, you know, Twitter bots and whatnot. And I have to say that, you know, I was on this morning, I was talking about this earlier, but it really put a bee in my bonnet, so to speak, if, you know, because we knew that he was going to assert attorney-client privilege. And ultimately, all it was Elaine testifying, her asking questions that ultimately were declarative statements for the most part, and then him asserting the privilege on advice. And, you know, the negative inference that can be given to somebody who asserts their Fifth Amendment privilege, you know, against self-incrimination, that can be given in a civil context. But in a civil context, the attorney-client privilege in Virginia, in particular, cannot be treated negatively. So the jury cannot take a negative inference from what they saw. Now, of course, you know, what's stopping them? So I'm sure there will be jury instructions about that. But how did you guys feel about seeing that deposition in particular? Anybody else who hasn't commented?
Well, I'll comment. I think that from the juror's perspective, if it's to make from Amber Heard's attorney team, I think it does make his team, Johnny Depp's team, look not in a favorable light. And if that was what they wanted to accomplish, I think that they were successful in that. It did appear to be very evasive. It appeared to be a big waste of time. And I think that that doesn't bode well with the jury. It's like, well, why would we even have him call him as a witness? But I think that it worked for Amber's team. It appeared that he's hiding something, or hiding quite a bit. So I think that it worked for Amber's benefit.
I have a slightly bigger problem with it, which is I don't think her counterclaim was a good idea. First of all, apparently that's where she tripped into the psychological evaluation from what you're saying. But beyond that, she's telling the jury, well, he defamed me, so I should get $100 million. So instantly she's giving credence to his theory of the case, which is that if he's been defamed, he should get money, because she's saying, I've been defamed, I should get money. I don't think she's ever going to be able to prove causation or damages. I mean, she's got the problem of linking the attorney's comments to Depp, but then she's got a bigger problem of proving that those comments really caused anything in the sea of publicity that was out there about this, and that she actually suffered economic damages. And to have a counterclaim in the case that you're going to lose just gives you another credibility problem, right? It just tells the jury, here's another thing I'm telling you that you're not going to believe.
I think that's a great point. I think that's a great point. Just the whole idea of her claim. It's almost like, I'm not a lawyer, but strategically making a counterclaim to get rid of this whole thing makes sense. But once you get to a jury, then you're just continually raising the bar in your case, which I think, Amber Heard and her team have done continuously. I mean, if you read the op-ed, it's so simple. She has to prove this very simple thing she doesn't have to prove anything, but she has to defend against this very simple claim. Instead, she's brought in these extreme allegations of abuse. And so she continuously raises the bar about what she does kind of have to prove now.
She has heightened her own burden of proof and to a level that she can probably never get to.
She isn't even worth $100 million. I mean, at this point, my understanding she's worth like $7 million. So the idea that she suffered $100 million worth of damages, it just sort of goes back to the psychological profile, if accurate, of somebody, it's tit for tat. And it makes her look very juvenile, in my view, from the legal perspective. I am curious about the credibility issue. I want to talk a little bit more about that. When I'm looking at credibility, I'm looking at a whole bunch of things. My background is investigations as well as litigation. And so I'm looking at a whole slew of things. But I'm curious about her credibility, because what I saw was sort of, what I've described as sort of this mock trial mentality of testifying. Like FBI agents go to school to learn how to do the thing. And it drives me batty because it's so disingenuous. And it's annoying, and it also hurts your neck. But I can't take it. And it was just so pronounced and annoying. And I'm curious about all of your thoughts on the credibility issue and from your perspectives, your unique perspectives, but also Dr. Jill about, what the jury is going to be looking for credibility.
Well, I'll just hit that last. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
If I can jump in first, I've been kind of wanting to say this. Rich and I were on air at the same time when Jesse from Law and Crime asked Rich if he thought that Amber was credible, and Rich, because he was first, because he got asked the question first, said that she was, that he believed that Amber Heard was credible. He got roasted on social media. Right, Rich?
That is true. That is my first time ever being ratioed.
He got roasted. But I want to jump in now first, so I can say I also thought Amber Heard was credible. And I think a lot of the sort of audience, right, the people that are watching, that are watching the trial, they confuse credibility with truthfulness, right? Credibility and truthfulness are not the same thing. In fact, I view her credible because she was rehearsed. I view her credible because she was what I thought she needed to be when she gave her testimony. Now, the cross-examination, I know Rich is going to go off on this. The cross-examination is a different story. When she was giving her testimony, she was what I thought she should have been. So I viewed her as being credible.
Okay. Dr. Jill, let's go to you first, and then we'll jump around the circle.
So it's hard for me to distinguish her direct from her cross in terms of her credibility. And I think that, from a juror's perspective, they're paying attention to things like you mentioned, Dr. Tracy, her body language, but they're also paying attention to how do her statements line up to the videos, the audios, the other witnesses, the facts. And so that's going to be the biggest challenge to her credibility. But I do want to just say one thing about this looking at the jury thing, because I think it is interesting, and I work with witnesses all the time, and we do advise the witnesses to look at the jury, but not the way Amber Heard is doing it, or did it. So we suggest that when you're explaining things on direct, when you're explaining things, when you're telling a story, when you're describing and talking, look to the jury because you're telling them. They might not look back at you, but we always hear from jurors, they want to look you in the eyes, right? But not the way she's doing it. She's on cross and she's saying, yes, no. I mean, she's like you said, she's hurting. She's like whiplash, and it's odd. And I'm thinking the jurors probably find it really awkward and contrived. So,
I think her preparation was problematic going back to the lawyer in the case. I think she was over-prepared, as they say. And oddly, we see a tape of her being deposed where she's having a snack in the middle of a videotape deposition. I don't know who thought it was a good idea to bring in a food buffet in the middle of her deposition. That you shouldn't do. But then on examination in the courtroom, she's very rehearsed, and she's putting a lot into it, and she's trying to sell her story. I see all of that, and I hear everybody saying that. I think he was physically abusive to her. That is my take of the evidence. I think there were occasions where Johnny Depp was physically abusive to her. It is also my view of the evidence that she is embellishing the extent of that. So I don't know what to do with that when you ask was she credible, because I think there was physical stuff. I don't know if there's as much as she said. And when I have a problem with the Depp team here is that they want to say, oh, she manufactured photos, she staged scenes, she called the police, she ginned all this up. I think they are taking on too much of a burden. They don't need to prove any of that. They don't need to prove that she staged stuff. They don't need to prove that she falsified photographs. They just need to prove that he didn't hit her. So why go out and paint her as this criminal mastermind who got all these witnesses to come in and say they saw stuff that didn't exist?
Karen, what do you think?
Well, I don't think that she is credible. I don't think that she is truthful. I think she sees the world in her own mind and has created a circumstance that she demonstrated on both direct and cross-examination. I think that the problem we have is that when you see the Johnny Depp in the videos and you see the person sitting there, you see the same person basically. When you see and hear Amber on the audio and a little bit of her on the videos, she's a totally different person than she is sitting in the courtroom. The way she dresses, obviously she's on the red carpet, she's wears very revealing clothing, a lot of makeup. Now she comes across in the courtroom very buttoned up, very little makeup, her hair is up. So we see two different people, two different personalities. And I think that that's what's difficult. When she's on the witness stand, we see someone who comes across a certain way, and she's being, every little detail of both of them are being analyzed and torn apart in the public, on social media. And so we're to believe that these two different appearances or presentations of Amber are one person. And I think that that's where her story falls apart. And I think in the beginning it was, and I agree that the Depp team is going really far to try to discredit her. So I'm more inclined to say, did she inflict some of these injuries on herself? Because it's not just bruises that are created by makeup. There was video, or I'm sorry, the photographs actually appeared that she did suffer some injuries. Some people say, well, she bit her lip. I don't know if that's the case, but I think that they're both sides are having a difficult time. I agree. She suffered some type of physical injury. So then the Depp team, I think they would have to argue that they were self-inflicted, because it appears that some of them were actual, she was harmed, and some either self-harmed or Johnny did it. So that's my struggle with her in the case.
Some of the stuff that she says is just outrageous when you start lining the facts up. And I think for me, that's what I've done, is I've lined the facts up. Is that, you walked over broken glass on your feet were sliced up, but the next day you went off and you did photo shoots, and you did a dance rehearsal where you were dancing barefoot, on a dance floor. That doesn't square. When she Freudian slips with the bruise kit, and then immediately goes to correct herself and says, no, I mean, I call that a bruise kit, because that's something in the acting world where in special effects makeup, it's actually called a bruise kit. You can purchase it. And a number of different special effects makeup companies make it. There were times where she was just getting herself turned around in her own testimony. And what really did it for me from the very, very beginning, and I was probably sort of harsh this way, which is that the second she told me this was the very hardest thing that she's ever done, I didn't believe her, because she had done it in the UK. She had done it under deposition in this case. She had done it under deposition in the UK case. She had gone and paraded herself in front of the paparazzi and in front of the courthouse in downtown LA and walked in there and filed a petition. I just simply, when you tell me that's the hardest thing that you've ever done is this testimony that you're about to give, I don't believe you. You've done it many times before. By this point, it should be comfortable, that you should be somewhat comfortable doing this. And she wasn't. She wasn't at all. You could see the tension between her and Elaine. And Elaine sort of giving up at the end was something that I'm sort of struck by. You fight until the end. You fight as hard as it takes. You tell the judge, I'll take a minute. Can I have 5 minutes just to go collect myself and come back? I mean, you do something. You don't abandon your client. But I think that back to Amber is just she came off with sort of factual inconsistencies throughout. She threw her sister under the bus. Her sister taught Johnny Depp the tampon applicator technique of snorting coke. I mean, the pictures themselves, I think I mentioned this to Rich on the podcast, was that there was this ping pong table that supposedly they landed on when she was allegedly being sexually assaulted, and the thing collapses. Okay, I can buy that. But then when the paddles are just fixed just so, and usually paddles don't fall that way. When you see the bed allegedly being broken and there's a shard of wood that would require like sort of a knife cut to get off, a boot doesn't do that. So there were just things that didn't make sense to me along the way. And then there were those Freudian slips. And there was another one, and I can't recall it right now.
TMZ.
Yeah. It was just, there was a lot of those things where they come out in the moments that you least expect, and you just sort of are shocked. Now, I don't know what the jury would think about those things, whether they would catch those things. What I do understand is that the jury was very focused on Camille Vasquez and not on Amber on that cross. And I don't know if that's typical or not.
One thing I mentioned to you, Tracy, was that, we don't know what the jury thinks, but I found it really interesting that when Amber was with the tissues and very seemingly upset on the stand, I found it incredibly odd that no one said, do you need a moment? Like not the judge, not her lawyer. And that's very common for a witness who gets upset on the stand, for someone to say, do you need a minute to compose yourself? And no one did that. And I found that really telling, that those people in power there didn't, including her lawyer, didn't, it's like they didn't buy it. I could be wrong, but that was my take.
I thought the worst moment for her in her testimony was right at the end, when she got up and walked out of the courtroom.
Oh my God.
I don't know what she was thinking, but when it was finally over, however long she was on, 3 days, and she stands up and she walks past her lawyers, doesn't acknowledge them, and walks out the door before the jury got to leave. That was terrible. That was a disaster.
How did that happen? I mean, I can't imagine that the deputy, I mean, I watched the deputy do it, but the judge instructs you twice to go have a seat near your attorney. Now, I'm not going to violate that, but she felt she could, and she just kept doing it. And then the deputy walked her out the door. I didn't understand that.
It was bad on many. I assumed she had to go to the bathroom, to tell you the truth, but the jury was about to be let out. There was no reason to run out. She needed to acknowledge the jury, walk back to her seat, sit down with her lawyers, and look triumphant, not leave the room.
Yeah, I don't know if you could even fake triumphant given how that redirect went. I mean, everybody saw how that redirect went and how, Ellen just gave up at the end. And I think part of it, I think what Amber Heard experiences at times is the black sheep phenomenon, right? This idea that no one likes me, even though I'm a part of all of these different groups, no one likes me, right? Going to Dr. Jill's point about no one stopped to ask if she needed a moment, because nobody believes her, because nobody likes her. And I think she feels that, right? People are laughing in the gallery when she's giving her testimony. At the end of it, I think at some point you just got to get out of the room, right? You just need to be away from everything, because everybody's looking at you and everybody's judging you, and no one is on your side.
She's got it. I mean, she's got it tough there a little bit because Johnny Depp, because he's the plaintiff, gets to be right next to the jury. She's got to be all the way on the other side of the room. And that courtroom is packed with Johnny Depp supporters, because they're the people showing up for this trial. She may have supporters, but they're not in Fairfax, Virginia, going to this trial. So she's really playing an away game here, and it makes it hard.
What do you make of that? That we're seeing just this massive support for Johnny Depp. Now, I understand, I didn't see this, but I understand that you got attacked on Twitter or one of the social media sites. I have yet to be attacked, thank goodness. But I'm trying to understand. Well, I get attacked for other things, so don't worry about that. I have yet to understand, why this massive outpouring of support for Johnny Depp and not other people who in the past have been in this situation. Not the exact situation, but in this situation. Any thoughts?
I have a ton of thoughts from the psychologist perspective. Yeah, from a psychologist perspective, I have a ton of thoughts. What I would argue is, number one, is that it's Johnny Depp. Now, let's take all of the same scenario, right? Like the exact same thing, but we put Harvey Weinstein in Johnny Depp's position. Are we still having the same amount of people on Harvey Weinstein's side, right, on the plaintiff's side? I would argue that we're not. What we're seeing actually is a halo bias, because we have Johnny Depp, and there's a cultural shift against the Me Too movement, right? Because we have the halo bias, because Johnny Depp has been a star for a long time, that one person just starts the trend on social media and said, justice for Johnny. Everybody it catches fire because Johnny Depp is attractive. His defense team, Camille Vasquez is attractive. His psychologist that he had on his side was attractive. And all of a sudden, everybody becomes that Isaac Baruch is like, the most amazing, witness of all time with his, magnanimous, nature. All of a sudden, everything is positive on his side. And if that's the case, if one person is positive, two people can't be positive. If one person is positive, one person is antagonist, that means the other person has to be the antagonist. The other person has to be the villain. And so at that point, all of a sudden more people are going to be showing up justice for Johnny rather than I stand with Amber Heard, because we're seeing a lot of social psychological principles at play when it comes to this case. And it's unfortunate for Amber Heard because it also necessitates a deafening of the conversation when it comes to domestic violence and intimate partner violence issues.
I just have a kind of an adjacent point on this. I don't see Me Too waning, but I do see this case, it is relevant because Johnny Depp is claiming to be a victim of abuse. And so, I think that people are struggling with how exactly to, they want to know the truth. I think that the crowd in the room they love Johnny Depp. I mean, Johnny Depp's like huge, and he's always had a fan following, and now he has a fan following related to this case. They want to, they're there to support him. They're not the jury, so I think that there's a risk that everybody feels that the room is telling them that everything's going great for Johnny Depp when who knows what's happening with the jury. But I think that he brought this case. He brought this case because he is claiming to be the victim of domestic violence, and I think that that's something to consider in the context of this bigger conversation about domestic violence, which is not my forte, but I just do think it's interesting, to have a powerful man claiming to be abused by a woman.
I think sort of two things. One, I think the litigation is only part of Johnny Depp's image rehabilitation strategy. He has a fierce public relations machine that is representing him very effectively, and it is using the litigation as part of the public relations effort, and it is spinning him out as having been a victim here. That's number one. Number two, I fundamentally believe some of what Amber Heard wrote in that op-ed is correct, that our society, right, still gets around men who are accused of being the abusers and protects them, and at times picks on the alleged victim. Now, we can debate whether or not she is a victim, but I think he is benefiting from that, and he is benefiting a little bit from, I think what John said is sort of an anti-Me Too sentiment.
I think that's interesting. It sort of dovetails off of a study that I did. When I earned my doctorate, I did a dissertation on implicit bias in workplace investigators. And what that study showed, among other things, was that men believed women, believe it or not, and women did not believe women by a large percentage. And so I do think that is a very, it's sort of a very interesting component to this. I mean, we've never really spent a lot of time as a society thinking about men as abuse victims or abuse survivors. And I have listened to those audios like you have. And to me, there are many that are chilling. They're just chilling. And, I don't hear him in those those audios screaming at her. I hear them calling each other names, but I hear her doing things that are just chilling. And her voice gets so disturbing.
I think it's pretty clear they were verbally abusive to each other. I think there's a lot of evidence in the case. There's people who have quoted things he said. There's some audio. It obviously was not a happy marriage. It was not a fun place to be. And so, but that's part of the discussion here. When does a fight that's out of control become domestic abuse, right? What is the line between those two things? And that's something I think the jury in the case is going to have to grapple with.
And if it was mutually abusive, then is her op-ed misleading? I mean, is it deceptive and misleading? And I think if the jurors don't like her, they will be motivated against her, and they can say that that it was defamation, even if they think that it was mutually abusive.
And
right, and that was something. Yeah,
that
was something that the marriage counselor had mentioned. This idea that it was mutually abusive, and it's one of these things where we have to understand power dynamics, which is another conversation that we should have been having. Is the power dynamics within a relationship, because I agree with Rich I think this relationship was 100% toxic for the both of them. Now, they may not have been toxic to other partners, but they were toxic to one another. And each one of them did something. Is that mutual abuse? Is it domestic violence? Is it intimate? What is it? We don't know, but that's not the conversation that we're having. We're having a conversation about ancillary things like drug use and how much cocaine can fit in a jar. Like, we're having all of these different conversations than the ones that we need to actually be having as part of our civil discourse. And unfortunately, it's getting lost in the theatrics of this case.
I think that that one of the things that we struggled with early on was, is it abusive? I know that Jesse Weber asked me several times, and I kept going to well, what are the jury instructions going to say about this? Because I can't imagine that there isn't going to be a tight definition that gets utilized to try to explain to the jury, here are your instructions to figure this out. Now, the reason why this is in Virginia is because of the servers, but when you compare the domestic violence law, the definition of it out in California to the one in Virginia, I will say that I wrote an article about this, but I will say that the one in California is this long, the one in Virginia is this long. And so, my guess is that Chu and company are going to be fighting, to the ends about that the definition should fall under the Virginia statute.
And that's more of this legal finagling that will go on in this trial that we'll never see on TV. There's going to be a whole fight about what are the jury instructions going to say? Is there going to be a verdict form? What are the questions going to be on the verdict form? How many questions are there going to be? All of that stuff is crucial. What are for how the jury will ultimately determine the case? And I would love to see the jury instructions if we can get a copy.
So anybody on Law and Crime that's watching right now, if you guys could get a head start on that, Rich and I'd like to see those jury instructions. And
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Got it.
I just wanted to add really quickly that I think that what Amber, that the burden that they have is a huge burden, because she not only argued emotional abuse, physical abuse, but the sexual abuse. And I don't know if the jury doesn't buy that one aspect of the sexual abuse, are they going to discount the emotional, physical abuse? And I think that was a stretch for her to do that. I think that that's going to be a hard burden for them to overcome, and whether the jury's going to believe that. I think that's in terms of the actual abuse that occurred, that she's alleging, that's going to be a big problem. And she could have moved forward without that and maybe would have had a better chance with the jury, but she's arguing, she just threw in the whole kitchen sink. And I just don't know if the jury's going to buy that each and every one of those allegations of abuse actually occurred.
Yeah, she sort of had to do that, though, because the sexual abuse thing is right in the headline of the article. And I know they tried to distance her from the headline of the article, but she retweets the article. I mean, I guess she didn't retweet it. She tweeted the article, headline and all. I think it's hard for her to not have responsibility for that.
And I think some of that right there, what we're talking about just now, is also a product of her testimony, which is she's committed to this story now. Right? This is the story that she's told. This is the one that's going to go down in history, right? It's on the court record. She has to be committed to saying this thing, whether it's elaborate, whether it's exaggerated or not. She's committed to this thing.
You have to defend the worst version of the story you told, because if you back off at all, you're a liar.
And I don't understand what the strategy was on their side. I don't understand why you would have brought a counterclaim and put yourself in that situation, other than pure hubris.
Every defendant wants a counterclaim. Every defendant who gets sued thinks, oh, do I have a counterclaim? I'm going to sue them for money. And can often be a strategic mistake.
Do you think that Elaine and company are insurance counsel or not? Anyone who has an inkling. I've been trying to figure this out.
Under what kind of policy? Under like a personal liability policy?
It's under a homeowner's. Defamation is a tort that's covered.
I haven't thought about that. I don't know.
And so under that circumstance, there'd be no harm, no foul, in theory. But because there'd be some recovery at some point potentially if you were to prevail.
I don't know. Amber Heard tried to testify the other day that she spent $6 million on legal fees. I mean, she got cut off on an objection, but that's what she tried to say.
No. I mean, maybe so, but no. So let's think about, does anybody have any burning thoughts that have come to them since we've been talking? Anybody have any last thoughts about the case, about what you expect to see, what you hope to see? The rest of, let's see, tomorrow is Friday. It's dark tomorrow, I think. And so next week, Monday, Tuesday, what do you think?
So I think two things. One thing that interests me is, as I understand it, that because this is timed, right? They're on time limits. Amber Heard's team has 8.5 hours left, and Johnny Depp's team has 18 hours left. And that is a huge advantage to have that much more time. No.
Yeah, Heard's team has the 8 hours. Yeah.
Yeah.
Depp's
so Johnny Depp,
18, yeah.
right? Because they spent so much time cross-examining Depp and putting on Amber Heard because they couldn't get any of the exhibits and the evidence and had to have a zillion sidebars. But in any event, having that much more time. I mean, if you think of it like a football game, if you got to hold the ball twice as long at the end of the game, you'd have a huge advantage. So that's number one. Number two, I expect a watershed moment in this case to be the reappearance of Johnny Depp. I don't know if Amber Heard's team is really going to try to call him as a witness as they threatened, or he's going to appear on rebuttal. But he's got to get on the stand, and I'm looking for him to specifically deny the sexual abuse allegations, right? Because he didn't really testify about those on his prior testimony. And that testimony from him is going to be really important.
Anybody else? What do you think? What are you expecting? What do you hope?
I would hope to hear from Johnny Depp again. I agree. I think that with Richard, that is a good, I think it would be a mistake for Amber's team to call him. I think that he is loved by the jury, comes off as very credible. And we see what he's going to do. He's already been on cross-examination and he handled himself well. So I think that it would be a mistake for Amber's team to recall him. And I think that to end the case for Johnny Depp, I think we need to hear from him again.
What do you think the jury's hoping, besides that they get to go home soon?
They might like a couple of celebrities to come strolling in to testify. I think, they heard about Kate Moss. Maybe she'll come in. I think there was some disappointment in how long there was the cross of Whitney Heard. But there were some seeds planted that suggest that perhaps, what's her name? Jen, that she lived with. That she'll come in to testify. And I think those kinds of things would be, I think the jurors are looking for gotchas. That's what they really start writing things down and paying attention. Real people, live people.
They've been in this thing for 5 weeks, right? I think they want to go home. Johnny Depp said on his second day of examination, he answered a question. He said, "I don't feel like I'm wasting anybody's time." I don't know what those jurors think, right? They're spending 5 weeks figuring out whether it was the dog that left the gift on the bed or Amber Heard.
You're right. If they have to be there, they might as well be entertained.
That's true.
Dr. John, last word.
You know what? I think that this is probably going to end on a whimper, right? We were promised high drama. We were promised Shakespeare. We were promised Tennessee Williams. But at the end of the day, we're just going to get some low rent, playwright that never had a hit. So I think this is going to end up going out on a whimper.
Oh, I don't know what to expect. I think Shannon Curry might revisit us on the stand. She was sitting in during the trial, whether she was just there for an intimidating factor or whether she was there to take notes and then to reemerge later, I don't know. I think Jen Howell is a very good possibility, and somebody who can discredit the sister, who was thrown under the bus on direct testimony by Amber Heard. I just don't understand that. I don't understand. One other thing I don't understand is throwing your lawyers under the bus on cross-examination. I've never seen that in my life. where, you know, a lawyer gets thrown under the bus by their client like that. I mean, I don't know what I would have done in that situation. It creates an ethical problem. And, you know, there was an immediate sidebar after that, and I don't know what transpired, but boy, did I want to be up there listening.
Yeah, well, there's a dichotomy there, because she's throwing her lawyers on the bus on that side of the courtroom, and on the other side of the courtroom, they're all hugs and, you know, high fives at the end of the day.
Exactly.
A little too touchy-feely for my taste.
I agree with that, actually. I agree with that.
Between two of them.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so, because it's not,
Never
you know,
in my life.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And no. I don't know if it's because I'm a female that I've had that experience, but, you know, I've had clients hug me and be happy with, you know, having somebody zealously advocate for them. I do think there's this marked difference on the other side. There's some video that I've seen where Amber leaves the courtroom and you see the lawyers and they are laughing on her side of the room. And I don't know if it just is a coincidence, if there's a causal connection, or if it's just, you know, if it's just, you know, a coincidence, but it's something that stuck out at me. I noticed that they're playing musical chairs, you know, and people are sitting in different chairs. And then today, Elaine wasn't in sitting behind her. You know, I don't know what's going on there, but I would think that the jury, as they're getting bored with these depositions, are looking around the room and they're picking up on those things. Now, we know nothing about these people and what they do. And so, you know, we don't know what their skill sets are and you know, whether there's somebody, you know, like me or like Karen, who's an investigator of some sort, and they pick up on these details, or whether they're not, whether there's somebody who's just, you know, this isn't their thing. You know,
they're paying attention to everything. They're paying attention to everything. Right. Yeah. They're paying attention to everything. And I agree that I think the Johnny Depp team I think they are a little too jovial. Honestly, I think there's a little too much. There's no poker faces. They're reacting to everything. And I think that's
candy on the table risky. And everything. Yeah.
It's very risky. Very risky.
What would your advice be, Dr. Jill, to both teams at this point, if they were listening?
At this point, I mean, they're so far in. I mean, I think that I would just, you know, I think that for the Depp team, I think they do need to really focus in on the jury and be less in tune to what's going on behind them. Because I think that they're a little jovial because of what's happening behind them, and they don't know they don't know that they've won this, and they need to, you know, I think, be respectful of the jurors' time, you know, to Rich's point, and to the process. And Amber Heard's team, you know, I don't know how she is to deal with as a client, but they need to be a little friendlier. I mean, they need to be a little more cohesive and show that the jurors do pay attention, and to the extent that they don't want to spend time with her, she doesn't want to spend time with them. It perpetuates the narrative that she is an unlikable and difficult, and that's not helpful.
Yeah, if I can, just real quick, I think Depp's team probably needs to, you know, buckle it down a little bit more, right? Be a little bit more professional. And I think Heard's team needs to listen to Eminem's "Lose Yourself," right? That I don't know when they're going to show up, but my hope for Amber Heard is that eventually they do show up. And if that means listening to that song, then do what you got to do to get yourself in the right headspace, because they have not been at all.
So here's the straw poll. We're the jurors. Does Johnny Depp prevail or not?
No, case tossed out. All cases did. Like, get out of here, get out of my state, and may God have mercy on your souls.
So you think the judge tosses it, or you think
I think the jury comes back and just like, no.
Okay.
Neither one of your claims.
Okay, so 0 on both sides. Karen?
I'd give them each $1 and call it a day.
So they both prevail, they each get $1. Okay.
Yeah.
Rich?
0-0. I don't think either of them can satisfy all the elements of their claim. Whatever that verdict sheet says, neither of them are going to make it all the way through.
And Dr. Jill?
Well, if the jury's anything like us, I think they don't agree. They can't reach a verdict.
I have maintained a position that I will not predict outcomes, and I am sticking to it. I do not do it. Jesse tries to get me to do it every time, and I refuse. So I will not predict. I will be that one juror that just sort of sits there. And probably they have to instruct me to deliberate. So I appreciate having each of you here tonight. This was a lot of fun, and I hope you'll come back again. This was a great opportunity to really talk about the issues that this case has brought forward, and we could talk for days about this. So I hope that you folks will join me again, and I hope that people watching enjoyed our show and that you will listen to the podcast. This show is both broadcast live, it's rebroadcast as a video, and it is also broadcast as a podcast, and you can find it anywhere that you find your favorite podcast. So with that, I thank you for being with us this evening, and I wish you all a great evening and a great tomorrow. Thank you.